So for those who are unfamiliar with me, I've been playing Wizard101 for more years than I'd like to admit. But I figured it would be interesting to do a tier list on Wizard101 and maybe future tier lists, but starting with ones based on the worlds and basing each world basically off of storyline, what the world gives you, say like spells that you get in that world or abilities that you get in that world, visual appeal, things like those. And there will be no bias. I mean, I know there's classic worlds in here, meaning Wizard City from Dragonspire, but I'm just basing this off of criteria only without any bias, because then there would be no point to the list. So we're going to start with the very first world and go on further than that, that being Wizard City. Now, Wizard City has a bit more of an advantage than all the other worlds due to it always being added on to. So, Wizard City, obviously storyline-wise, easy to say one of the best storyline in the world because it starts with Wizard City and that leads to everything. So, but it comes back later on, say with Castle Darkmoor and with the sewers and all sorts of things that get added on to Wizard City. It also has a very wide range. Say the Commons looks different from, say, Triton Avenue, and Triton Avenue looks different from Cyclops Lane, and Cyclops Lane looks different from Firecat Alley. It does have very wide range of appearances. It also has things like Crab Alley that takes an entirely different toll, takes you underwater. It has a very wide range of visual appeal. Also, storyline, it has it all. I think this sets a precedence to be the best in S tier, but that may be the only classic world to get any special treatment due to it being the only world that they came back and added on to with future dungeons. So next we have Krokotopia. Now, Krokotopia is a very I can't say it's not visually appealing. It's very cool in the way that it's designed to be, very, very ancient looking, very desert, and it stays true to that design. I'd say a lot of the worlds, a lot of the areas in Krokotopia look very similar to one another. It kind of just looks like you're wandering through sand all the time. So it doesn't have the greatest visual appeal. In terms of storyline, that is where you track down, or you're hoping to find the Croconomicon, or you learn about it. In terms of what you get from Krokotopia, you're usually around level 12-ish, 13-ish when you're in Krokotopia, around there. In those levels, you do get a lot of things just because you're around that level. It does give you access to the Elemental Blade and Spirit Blade, which is something you'll use for the rest of your time in playing the game. So its visual appeal hurts its overall ranking, but I think Krokotopia would be I would say it's a solid A tier. It could jump down to B tier. I think I'm going to leave it at an A tier, but it's the only reason I'm putting it up that high is because Krokotopia does give you things that you keep with you always. That, like I mentioned, Elemental Blade and things like that, and even traps if you guys get it. But its visual appeal is very, very blasé. But even the storyline that's involved in Krokotopia is kind of decent. Becoming a champion, and you learn about the Croconomicon and where you're supposed to head to next. It could really land itself in B tier, but I think it just maybe gets itself to A tier. So next we have Marleybone. And Marleybone is one of the few worlds that actually has a nighttime. So visually, because it finally looks different, being night, it helps it a little bit. It's just that everything else about Marleybone is so similar to one another. Like, I can't think even off the top of my head, what's different in every area. Like, each area kind of looks the same, just laid out differently. Although it's nighttime there, it takes a huge dive in visual appeal. In terms of storyline, That's where we led to Miarti, whatever that is. And we see Malastare again for a split moment. That's all you really achieve there. I mean, the storyline's not really good with Marleybone. It doesn't really advance you too much further. You don't get anything spectacular there. No, I would say Marleybone is a C tier world. The only reason that I couldn't put it down in D tier is because it does, however, have nighttime going for it. It's different than the other worlds in that regard. It does allow you to see Malastare for the first time, aside from the tutorial. So that's what's carrying it, but not much is left there. And then after Marleybone, we then go to Mushu, if I can find it. Mushu, here it is. Okay, Mushu was a very surprising world. It was very unique, I must say. Mushu was pretty cool. There was a lot of story that happened in Mushu with the Emperor, and that is where you get the key to Dragonspire as well. Everything that happened in Mushu made sense. You work your way to gain the respect to see the Emperor and help the Emperor, and that's when the Jade Oni, and then it actually built itself up pretty well visually. It has its moments where it looks different. A lot of it is, though, just green patches on the side with a yellow sidewalk. But it did really have some unique areas, I must say. It did have some true to its element kind of feeling. And around Mushu, you're about level 30 and 40, so this is when you're around Mount Olympus level. So you do get Mount Olympus around this world, which helps you until basically level 50-ish. It's not a bad world at all. I think it's a pretty good world. It's nothing spectacular, though. But it's a solid B tier. So after that, we have Dragonspire. Now, Dragonspire was obviously its storyline. For those who were around during first arc, it ended in Dragonspire. Celestia was the first world to be introduced after the first arc. And Dragonspire had a very beautiful ending to it. It built up. You had to do a lot of things to eventually fight Malastare. So it has a beautiful storyline. Visually, it's very red and very lava. That is pretty much Dragonspire, red and lava. But the dungeons themselves, the actual dungeons were pretty cool looking. During this level, you're getting your final spells. You're level 42. It does have a great ending, of course. So it's storyline S tier, but everything else about it, when you consider the visual effects, red, lava, dragons, and then red, it's not entirely the greatest, but it's not the worst. So Dragonspire is, just because of its great storyline, you see Sylvia. It's a very touching ending, even though Malastare comes back 10 times after, but I think it's an A tier. It's not an S tier, but it's an A tier. So then we have Celestia. Now, Celestia, when that world was first seen, when it first got introduced, it was the talk of the town. That's when cheats came in and everything. Celestia visually was really cool. It had a huge range. Again, it had an underwater. It had a beach. You had the floating land. It had its space type alien look originally. It had a wide range of enemies. You get a lot in Celestia. This is where you're introduced to Astral. You're introduced to Crit for the first time at level 50. Well, back then you were introduced for Crit in the first time. Nowadays we have pets at level 1 with 70 Crit on them. But level 50 is where you get crit gear, and it's also, if you've done side questing stuff, potentially where you can get waterworks as well. So Celestia had it all. Although the storyline of it wasn't super great. It had a decent storyline, but it kind of just ended with you turning up the sun, basically. You just fight that weird fire lady, and then that's it. It doesn't really help you progress. In fact, the storyline came from the beginning, because we had to help Hailstrom do that capacitor or whatever to get to Celestia to find this researcher. But the storyline could have been better. It doesn't really lead to the next world very well. It leads to Safaria, but you just kind of... The way you get to Safaria is just some guys trying to find all the students, so you just get there with a key. So it doesn't exactly branch off to the next world well. It doesn't bridge, essentially, like Mushu did to Dragonspire. So that is the only thing keeping it out of S tier, because to put an S tier, you really have to have it all. But it's an A tier. I would say it's the highest A tier. It's very close to S. Celestia was amazing. But the only thing keeping it out of it, to have S, you have to have everything. So, that's unfortunate. Zafaria is the world that came after Celestia. And visually, Zafaria... the first time I entered Zafaria, when it was introduced, it looked amazing. Like, Zafaria, it was very... it gave kind of like a Lion King type vibe. It was a very, very cool-looking world. But if you look at all the areas, they do bear resemblance to each other a lot. Until you get higher up there, and you start to get things like the Elephant Graveyard that goes very different, and the storyline was great, and it had very visually appealing things, but you had to wait a while to get it. However, you are introduced to things like Colossal. Colossal is an enchant you will use all the way till you reach the Arcanum. You're also introduced to Berserk, which then will allow you to get Frenzy. I may have reversed that order. But it does give you things you'll keep for the rest of your time, because people will carry more than one enchant. Storyline, though, because after Zafaria, I believe you go to Avalon. And that is when you're introduced to Morganth, which sets up Avalon pretty well, I suppose. It does allow you to know about the threat to Avalon, and so it does bridge a little bit. I think the only thing that's not exactly claiming it as an S tier is the fact that it's not that different. It's not terribly different. I mean, the Elephant Graveyard was really different from the rest, but it wasn't amazingly. Overall, that's maybe one of the one differences it had. Because other than that, you had kind of like burnt down forests, like Cloudburst and stuff like that. So it's... you know what? It can barely make it. I think it's a decent S tier, but it barely scratched the surface. Only because it did everything that it should. It just could have done it better. But it did check all the boxes. So then from Zafaria you go to Avalon. And here, I'm going to just do this. Now, I may raise it here, but I'm going to talk about why Avalon is so low. In terms of what you gain from Avalon, you get pretty much nothing. Like, this whole world, I think, was planned at the wrong time for everything that happened, because around this level, you're level 70-ish when you're in Avalon. So, your 78 quest from your teacher is a pet. So, during Avalon, you don't get any new spells from your teacher. You do get a level, I think it's 74 or 76. That's when Storm gets Healing Current and things like that. But if you're a school that doesn't get anything helpful, like what I mentioned, Storm getting Healing Current. Healing Current's not particularly helpful, not even for Storm. I mean, it's unreliable, obviously. And it's just, you get nothing from Avalon. Nothing. You don't get any special enchants like Zafaria. And I think the problem is, it's in between. Avalon's in between Zafaria, where you just got Colossal and Berserk or Frenzy. And then after that, you go to Azteca, which gives you Sharpened Blade, Potent Trap, and all these things that you'll use for your entire time. So right in between, it's this world where you just get nothing. No spell quest, no enchant, no new ability, no new gear even. Because by this time you have Waterworks, and you usually keep Waterworks till either you're level 100, or if you trade out for Hades, which is level 90. It just gives nothing. In terms of visual appeal, it's all the same thing. Castles, green, patch of sidewalk. It's staying true to its theme, but it doesn't really branch out. I know you do Ghost Avalon, but again, that just seems like a ripoff of what's been done. Avalon is a world I've actually fallen asleep with while I was questing. To me, it's kind of like just a filler world. The only thing that keeps it out of F tier is it does have a branching storyline, even though it's very depressing that the final boss is just a dragon. Not really particularly great. It sets up for everything you're going to do later on down the line. You do get King Art as a spell, but it's mostly used in PvP. King Art's not every school has a good King Art. In fact, I think at max 2 of them do. So Avalon is a D tier for me. From Avalon you go to Azteca. Now Azteca was a very, very cool world. And it even changed as you quested. You know, when you start out, and then the meteors start happening towards the end, when Morganth succeeds in that world. And then the meteors start happening, which didn't happen in the beginning. Very cool touch. Very interesting. Visually, it changes a lot. You know, you got the swamp areas. You've got your usual bricky roads. They take a bridge to a different world. It changes quite a bit. In terms of what you get from Azteca, like I mentioned before, Sharpened Blade, Potent Trap, Primordial if you're a healer, all sorts of auras. It definitely gives you things you'll keep for the end. It's got it all. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put Azteca up here, and I'm going to bring Zafaria down. I don't think Zafaria is as good as Azteca. And it's just a better example of what Zafaria did. This did everything Zafaria did, but better, like I wanted. And so there we are. So I could have addressed Aquila, because technically that starts at 30 with Mount Olympus. The only reason I didn't is because I don't know if I'd really consider it too much of a world. Same with the Arcanum here. I don't know if it's really a world of its own. Obviously, if we're going to talk about gear, what do you get there? You get quite a bit because of gear. Though the gear there isn't the greatest, it's only good for Mount Olympus. I personally don't like Hades gear. It's too clunky. Not just appearance, but like if your stats are all over the place because they give crit to 2 schools and then none for the other, and your damage is all over, your resist is all over. It's way too spread into specific things and not universal. Visually, it's cool, but it's all the same theme. Though the dungeons themselves are different. There's not much of a storyline. I mean, Cyrus sends you there for a test of champions and things, but it's somewhat storyline. Aquila would be a C or a B tier. I think because of the gear being so bad later on, I'm gonna put it in C tier. That's just my opinion. But I want to carry on with just the main worlds first. So we last left off on Azteca, which then were brought to Chrysalis. Now, Chrysalis is a world that is very, very interesting. This is where you discover shadow magic. Of course, you use that for the rest of your time there. You will always use shadow magic in your spells, if you strike, PvP and PvE. So useful stuff there. This is also the world where you're going to hit Castle Darkmoor. So Darkmoor gear comes along with it. You can do a side quest for another potion. Storyline wise, very, very good storyline. This, of course, leads to the fight with Morganth in Chrysalis. Though the world after Chrysalis, in terms of branching to it, it doesn't branch very well. I guess because it kind of ended. The arc ends there, so that's probably why. But again, this is one of those worlds where the storyline came before. You had to make a key to go to Chrysalis. So it's not a terrible world. Visually, it's very blue. But it does have a forest area with Gallic Poisonthorn. It has its regular areas, and it has, you travel a lot of things. It does the Colossus effects. It's visually appealing. It's a good world. You get a lot from it. It's just the storyline. You do end up fighting Morganth, and that's very impactful. And I guess that's where the arc ended, so that's why it doesn't bridge to the next world. So I can't blame it for that. It can go up there. I agree. So from Chrysalis, if I'm not mistaken, you go from Chrysalis to Polaris. If I am not wrong on that. Polaris is it's a world where you do get some things, but Polaris is the world that introduces you to the Arcanum. And that's why I said the Arcanum shouldn't be a world of its own, but Polaris is where you're introduced to the Arcanum. It's where you meet Mallory. I don't personally like her, but she does add story. That's where you deal with Grandfather Spider and Grandmother Raven and all these things. And Baba Yaga, who introduces you to the Arcanum. Visually, the world is very snowy. Snow. But it does differ sometimes. Sometimes you're on bare snow. Sometimes you're in the city with it snowing. You do ship quests and things like that. It has its visual appearance. It doesn't give a lot in terms of what you gain from the world. You've pretty much gained almost everything you would need at this point with Shadow Magic, your enchants, Darkmoor gear, Until Dragoon. It doesn't give much, but everything else about it is pretty darn good. So I would say it's an A tier. If it had to lean anywhere else, it would lean more in the B tier. I don't think it would lean towards the S tier. But it can nudge its way there. So then from Polaris we go into Mirage. Mirage, I think, is going to be my first F tier. To me, Mirage seemed too close to Krokotopia. It seemed way too close to Krokotopia in terms of visuals. And I'm not just being generic and saying that sand and sand equals the same. But it seriously, with its ancient type feel and it just seemed too close. It just seemed like Krokotopia updated to me. You don't get much from Mirage. That could be reason that you've gotten most of everything you need. But Mirage is not the greatest world in any regard. It copies too much visually. The storyline, nothing of huge significance happens. I mean, you defeat one of Spider's children, and then you kind of just go for his next child. Not exactly the greatest storyline. Yes, this is where you fight Grandfather Spider for the first time, and this is where Mallory gets hurt, and that sets up the next world. But that's really all that happens. It bridges to Imperia, and that's its only job. So I think it's an F tier. There's nothing of significance except for setting up the next world. So it's literally just like a filler world that copied Crocotopia. Don't appreciate it at all. So then the next world that we're talking about is Imperia. One of the longest worlds in the game. Visually, Imperia is very gloomy, but it has a wide range of different areas. Visually, it's obviously an S. In terms of story, I'm going to say the story is D, if not F, only because of its so many ripoffs. What with Captain J. Pork and then Beans and the Bat and then the Joker and the Bane. There's so much ripoffs from there, and they don't even try to mask it. They literally just make it apparent that they're ripping it off. Of course, that's the joke, but it's severely hurt with the amount of ripping off it does. It never feels serious because of all of that. It never feels like there's anything wrong that could happen, only because it feels like you're in a world of copycats all making jokes. They over-exaggerate the characters. It's the world where you put Mallory basically in a capsule and you learn to save her, and that sets up the whole grandmother Raven and things like that. But no, overall, Imperia, visually it's great. Storyline, it's terrible due to mountains and mountains of ripoff. What you gain from it, this is where you originally maxed out your level. So this gave you access to Dragoon gear at 130 before Caramel. So this was the best gear until Caramel came around and the crit update. It's a solid world. It has its ups and downs. But it is long. It's very visually appealing. The storyline, if you could ignore the blatant ripoffs, does do some justice. So it's a B leaning towards C tier. But it's a B because of how much effort clearly went into it with the part 1, part 2. And then Bartleby getting restored. It has its moments. So then we're left with the optional worlds, except for the Arcanum. I just don't think that should be a world. But I will rank it anyway before I get to the optional worlds. Arcanum, visually, obviously there's not many areas, so you can't use an excuse that it looks the same. Of course they all do, because it's one area essentially. Has a lot of story involved in the Arcanum. It does also make you feel like you've actually joined it. I will say that's a feeling with the Arcanum, especially when they give you their own dorm, so it gives you a house for free, and there's potion vendors and things like that. It does actually feel like you were accepted into the Arcanum. It does that really well with very minimal effort. You gain a lot, obviously. As a world, though, I think this could go into I'm gonna say it's an A tier. but you really could argue B, but I would say it's an A tier. Visually, it's very cool, as everything I've mentioned. Grizzleheim, it's optional. Most people do it because of the spell quests, especially if your school has a good 55 quests that you need to get to a certain mark. I think it's Vestralin you need to get to. Visually, it ranges quite a bit, especially with having 2 worlds built into one with Winter Tusk. It's a pretty good world. You gain lots from it. That's why people do it. It's simply for the gain. Storyline, it's neat. It doesn't really help the main storyline. That's why it's optional. But you do set up trade between worlds using Grizzleheim, so it does have some relevance to the beginning and things like that. Overall, Grizzleheim's a good world. It's just odd in terms of difficulty. If you're that level, you go from that to Winter Tusk, it jumps quite high from what it just was. It's solid. It's visually entertaining. It doesn't its own storyline, because I can't blame it for not branching, because it's not really a main one. But even as its own storyline, it's decent. Nothing spectacular. You do gain a lot. So I'd say it's an A tier. And Wisteria, the final world. This is where you go to the academy. You represent Wizard City. You win the champion for everybody. Everyone makes fun of you for not learning what they do, and you kind of teach them what's what. Very, very typical stuff. In terms of what you gain from it, you gain absolutely nothing in Wisteria. I don't even think you can level up in Wisteria that much, if anything. Visually, it has little to no change. You get to a kind of foresty area once with the trents and things, but visually it's kind of all the same. It has a lot of Mushu and Marleybone mashed together vibes. Its storyline is unique, at least. It does make you feel like you've won it for Wizard City. But overall, it's not the greatest. It's just not the worst. It's a C tier. So this is how I would rank the worlds of Wizard101. I'd much appreciate if anyone had a debate to say on my list personally, but this is how I would rank it. I can't say if I would change anything. There's a couple I could have gone either or on, like for example, I could have gone either or for the Arcanum. I think it could have been a B tier. I think Crocotopia could have jumped down, but it could also stay. There's definitely options to change around a lot, but I feel this is a decent enough list that I can stand behind. So if anyone has any qualms or debates about my list, I'm all ears. I would love to hear your opinion on my list, and if you want to see another one, and if you have a suggestion on what you want to see it on, I'd be more than happy to do that list, and see you guys next time.